have a very interesting session planned out. It is about the Temple of Chidambaram, and it is by Professor Shankar Tripathi. I would request him to start his presentation.
Thank you, ma'am. So we've had a lot of precise and very complex, I wouldn't say complex rather, but very technical ways of understanding how the artistic cultures have developed over a particular history in terms of Hindu innovations, crafts, art, temple, and architecture, right? But I want to kick it back a bit. And before I proceed with my whole paper and presentation, which is titled In Search of the Chola Temple and Its Composite Reality, a study of the Chidambaram Nataraja Temple, I want to ask just a very basic and fundamental question. So how do you exactly label the presence and space of a temple? When we approach a temple, when we come towards an architectural aspect of a particular civilization or a dynasty, how do you particularly call that this is perhaps a Chola temple? It's perhaps that a Chola king perhaps patronized it. Perhaps it was found in the Chola territory. Or perhaps it carried any certain sense of stylistic innovations that were particularly associated with that dynasty. But the point is that all of these are still speculative and general in the sense that there is no general consensus that when we apply a dynastic label, this is precisely the reason why we are doing it. There is this overutilization and just an oversimplicity which comes when we try to associate or like place a name, a dynasty, or just understand the nature of a temple per se. So through this presentation, I'm seeking to highlight the very problematic aspect of how we currently use the nomenclature, and by taking the example of the Chola dynasty, seek to understand what really constitutes a Chola temple. So when we look at the Chidambaram temple, which would be my example, I will see dynastic labeling and identify it with contextual realities. These realities would be religious, it would be social, they would be royal. And it would be in these contextual realities that not only did the Cholas function, but also how we need to adapt a newer kind of methodology in terms of assessing what the temple is like. So to begin with, it is important that we bear in mind the extent of the imperial Cholas' rise to power. So I'm not going to bore with the details of like the narrative history of from where did the Cholas came and what did they do. But if you just focus on the map that I've highlighted here, just focus on the blue region of the latter part of the Indian subcontinent. That is the area of focus. And the reason I want you to keep this map in mind is because there were a lot of dynasties which were vying and we were fighting for power, supremacy, land control right in the time when even the Cholas came. I mean, so for this particular section, there are a lot of scholars and they have done a lot of work. So I particularly taken up Nilakanta Shastri's work and Noburu Karashima. And Nilakanta Shastri, he has coined this one term, the three crown, which was essentially the fight between the Rashtrakutas and the Chalukyas with the Chol. So right at the outset, when the Chols came from the Pallav dynasty, there were already these 3-4 dynasties that were in contention with all of those areas there. And obviously then you have the rise of Rajaraja I and his successors, Vijayalaya, and all of those people, ultimately till Kulothunga II, after which we see a general decline of the dynasty. So we've established that this was a point and a place where a lot of dynasties and a lot of kingdoms were establishing a foothold. And this foothold wasn't simply economic or political or social, right? It was also visual. So all of these created a sense of visual artistry and an idiom of temple architecture and construction. That is why today, if you go to this region, you will say that, oh, this is a Pallav temple, this is a Chol temple, this is a Hoysala architecture, right? So you can associate and you can imagine something like this. What I want to posit is that the very same methodology that we use in identifying these elements, these temple architectural structures are problematic in their very basic fundamental understanding. So if we take this example here, you have two temples which are seemingly very similar, and that's perhaps the first point I want to raise about the problem. On the left, you have the the temple in Vijayanarayanam, and on the right, you have the temple at Sendalai. Now, the Vijayanarayanam temple is at the southernmost tip of the Pandya Nadu region, and the temple on the right is in the middle of the Chola Nadu region. And the Encyclopedia of Indian Temple Architecture, which is supposed to be the great book which classifies all these temples and indexes them according to the style and structure, right? So the encyclopedia calls that the temple on the left is in the middle Pandya Nadu style. Therefore, it means that it is part of the Pandya culture. But the same encyclopedia characterizes the temple on the right in the Chola style of architecture, which is interesting for me because if we formally try to understand why is the temple named particularly so, the formal aspects are very similar, if not the same. You see the same shallow niches, you see the same Brahmakant pilasters, you see the same Padbandha base that are there. So on one particular understanding of the formal reading, it just feels really truncated and redundant to imagine that these two will be stylized in different aspects when their formal characteristics are literally the same. And the problem gets even more compounded when you come to the same region. Now, these two temples, if I had removed the caption, it would seem that they're actually the same temple, or just of different views. But we know for a fact that, okay, this is the Balasubramaniam temple and this is the other temple. So these two temples are found in the same Pudukottai region. The times are also like similar and well, they're in the same lineage. But the point here is that the Balasubramaniam temple has been understood to be in the Pandya style because it was found in erstwhile Pandya territory. And the Sundareshwara temple has been understood to be in two iconic visual idioms. One has been the Irukkuvel idiom, and one has been the late Muttarayar idiom. These two have been associated with the Chol dynasty. But again, the problem still persists here. You see the Padbandha base, you see the brackets, you see the cornice, you see the Brahmakanta pilasters, even the shallow niches that are found in the Chola temples, the temple that we ascribe to the Chol dynasty, shouldn't necessarily have shallow niches because the whole idea of putting an image, a figure of a god or a deity or of any kind was introduced in these niches by the Chols. So by assumption, you would imagine that they are carrying a similar idiom that the Pallavas or people before them created. And that doesn't make sense. If they're carrying the same feature, how are we really stylizing them as Chol? Something which is different, right? Even Susan Huntington has noted this one stone temple at Nartamalai. Now she uses this inscription from a Pallav, from a Pandya king who says that this temple was consecrated for the Vijayalaya Cholishwara. That means it was made by the Vijayalaya king that was there in 1228. But its form and design are also very similar to what the earlier Pandya and Pallav temples used to be. So I hope you're realizing that this problem of attributing a dynastic label is very inherently truncated and very problematic because if you look at it from the formal point of view, it just doesn't make sense that there is a difference. And if you do not figure out a formalistic difference, you cannot ascribe it a royal distinction because not every temple will have an inscription with it. Not every temple will be visually identified that this was made by this particular king. And the problem is very similar. The reason I showed that map initially was to make all of you realize that because every dynasty was fighting in the same region. Now, it could be because of a problem of convenience, because of perhaps conserving resources. They did not decimate the temples or the idiom architectures that were created before them. They built upon, or rather, they just subsumed and appropriated those temples with, their new dynastic culture. So to really truly understand how do we access or how do we classify newer cultures or newly excavated or discovered temples, I am proposing a new kind of coda or a methodology here. That if we really want to look at temples, we need to realize these contextual realities that are now seemingly lost. And that is why I am taking the case of the Chol temple Chidambaram. Now I'm identifying that there are three major tendencies that Chol temples usually exhibited. And that was particularly unique to the Chol dynasty there. You had the emergence of temple towns, which is very visible in the visual in front of you. You have the Chidambaram temple right in the middle, and then the city evolves around it. You have the elevation of dance, hymns, and procession. The idea that a religious procession can emanate from a temple emerged from a Chol dynasty, and it had large repercussions for the way the temple would be consecrated and created. And then finally, you had a characteristic development of the size and importance of the Gopura. So you now keep these three things in mind, and we can now even begin examining a Chol temple. We have to look beyond the basic aspects of Dravidian temple construction because all of these temples had a had a Garbhagriha or their plan about the Viman or the Gopura. They were all present. So you need to go into the finer details. For example, in the Chidambaram temple, we know in the religious aspect, the temple is dedicated to Lord Shiv. But then that itself, that plane itself can be consecrated, can be dissected into much more finer points. And those finer points will actually help us realizing the true contextual reality of what a Chola temple could be. So right now here, just to recap, as in a general sense, you have that the Chidambaram temple is consisting of these various sabhas, right? The Chit Sabha, Kanak Sabha, Dev Sabha, Nritya Sabha, Raj Sabha. There are several tirtham. Tirthams are essentially the water bodies that are found there. Interestingly, beyond the Shaivite aspect, you also have the image of the Govindraj Perumal there. So you have Vaishnavite deities and devotees that also come to the temple. Uh, Chidambaram in itself is really important for its Nataraj association. So Anand K. Kumaraswamy wrote in The Dance of Shiva that the essential significance of Shiva's dance is threefold. Not only does it has its rhythmic play, not only does it release the countless souls of men from the snare of illusion, but he very clearly identifies that the place of the dance is Chidambaram. Chidambaram is the center of the universe. And this place, this temple, carries that Anand Tandav mythological construction of how the Nataraj dance even came to be. So that is where you realize that you do not simply look at a temple and you see that, oh, this is the deity. So that is why this deity, because this deity is associated with this dynasty, this temple is of that dynasty. This cannot actually hold true because you have the confluence of various religious communities coming together. Various dynasties would patronize various kinds of religious communities. So you cannot simply ascribe by saying that it was this shrine, so it was this dynasty. Then you, like I said, the emergence of the Gopuram, that is again an innovation that only comes with the Chol dynasty. So I've taken J.C. Harley's monumental study, and the picture here you see is of the Northern Gopuram. Now, the reason I've picked up the Northern Gopuram is to highlight another aspect of a contextual reality. Out of the four major Gopurams that are there, the Northern Gopuram has a picture of Krishnadev Raya, which is from the Vijayanagar dynasty. So here you can again see the problem of formalistic association. If someone had simply come to the Gopuram and saw the image of the Krishnadev Raya, you would have naturally associated it with Krishnadev Raya's rule or Vijayanagar rule. Whereas that would be falling into the trap of just the formalistic, over-dependence or overburdening of formalism. So that is why Gopurams again become a really important point, because now you're connecting with the whole temple compound. You're seeing the importance that they are mirroring the women, and then you're seeing how high they're going. You can then also see what kinds of sculptural traditions are coming onto the Gopurams. And this is again completely unique to the Chols. I'm taking Jared Mevison's study here because he has very painstakingly identified almost the 300 sculptures that are there. You come to a Gopuram and you can divide it into two tiers. You have the lower tier, which has around 175 to 200 sculptures, and they are mostly classified into various mandals. So you have I've shown the Navgraha images here. So you also have the Ashtikpal mandals, you have the Rishi mandals, and these are basically non-Shaivite sculptures. Then you also have the Shaivite sculptures, which constitute in the upper tier. 100 more sculptures have been identified based on the particular style, based on the iconographic traditions. Like we studied initially the lost wax technique and how they're creating the various iconographies of the various sculptures. Those are very particularly visible here. So again, you did not have to see the temple. You only had to focus on the contextual reality of what the Gopuram was talking about. And from there, you can deduce that because this temple is for Nataraj, the dance forms, the forms that are taken here are from the Natya Shastra. So they form a natural corollary. And that is where you attribute the significance. Here's another picture I've taken from the Durga panel there. So naturally, now that we've covered up the religious aspect, here comes an important aspect of it being social in its nature as well. The image on the left here, you can see the poster for the movie Nandanar, and the image on the right is the statues and the sculptures from the festival image of Tirupati. Now, these are mythological stories associated with the poet saints. And interestingly, they were both coming from this untouchable lower caste communities, which weren't necessarily allowed to enter or visit the temples, right? So there emerges this notion of exclusivity as well as inclusivity. I say exclusivity because the poster on the left is very emblematic of these two people. Those are worshipping the idol, right? So those depict the Chidambaram Dikshitar, the community that is actually present in the Chidambaram temple today as well, who are taking care of every internal aspect of the temple. Now, these communities, not just the Dikshitar, but other communities as well, were very close-knit groups. And they were the ones that controlled who would be able to come, who would be able to visit the Garbhagriha, who would be able to even step inside the temple. So there is a notion of exclusivity here. But at the same time, the other contextual reality is the realization that with Chol temples emerged not only temple towns, but the concept of a procession. Now you had the deity in front of you, which was not only immobile and present in the Garbhagriha, but was actually coming out to greet you. There were mobile forms, and these were called Utsav Murtis. These were processional idols, like the image that you see here on the left is the mobile form of Parvati. And the image on the left is the immobile form of Parvati, which is static inside the temple. So from here emerges the concept of inclusion, which you can see in this painting here, a Shaivite procession at night. So this is a company painting. So this is well in the 1800s, so 1830 exactly here. But you can see the essence of the idols being taken in a procession, and the various kinds of clothing depicts the various communities and the community members that are now able to reach this close to the idol. They are able to take their blessing. It is as if the god has come out of its womb to actually bless the people. So that element of inclusivity is also coming only with the Chols there. So even if the basic stylistic aspects are similar to other dynasties, we can examine the temple layout, the plan of the whole city there, and we can associate that this kind of a reality used to be there, and this is how then we classify this temple to be so. For example, another contextual reality with processions was how the architectural forms of the sabhas were created, the halls. So on the left image, if you can see below, there is a sculptural image of an elephant there. And the same thing on the right, you see that there is a wheel there. So you have had scholars like Huntington herself. So she tried to classify that these were again emblematic of the fact that the temple was no longer a immobile structure. These sabhas were symbolically portraying that they go out. So the chariot, the concept of a chariot or the concept of a rath here, it denotes that people do not need to be hesitant of the fact that the god is away from them. And this again is very peculiar to not only Chidambaram, but to Chol temples essentially. So now that we've even covered the social aspect, now comes a big question, right? Royal significance. Because at one point, someone can argue against me that the reason I picked up Chidambaram is very easy and convenient for me because we know that Chidambaram was very highly patronized by the Chol. And that is true for the biggest temples that are there in the Chol dynasty. You have the Gangaikonda Cholapuram temple, you have the Rajarajeshwara temple. There you see that there has been a concerted effort by the Chol royalty to establish a royal idiom. You have had various scholars that have done a lot of studies on it. Paul Younger had classified such a practice as one of the two pillars of the religious policy of the Chols. You have Pletchler Prentice and you have Geeta Vasudevan. They write that the Rajarajeshwara temple was to serve as a benchmark for subsequent Chol temples. Even Vidya Daheja mentions the practice that Rajaraja used to, not only did he donate 22 images himself, but he used to ask people in the village to remit a certain amount and to donate it to the temple's construction so that the temple can be vast in its splendor and understanding. And that is true for a lot of instances in these temples. So on the image on the left, you can see the golden roof of the Chit Sabha at Chidambaram. So this golden roof was established by Kulatunga too. So you have the Kulatunga Cholan Ula, the inscription that is there, and it talks about the just the ways that Kulatunga II and his family used to work on creating the perfect image of the Chidambaram temple. You've also have studies which talk about local commanders, military leaders like Naraloka Virat. So he was a military commander under the Chol army, and he also made a mark by donating various images, various statues, and various sculptures. Then the image on the right you have. So you have Shiv as Chandeshanugraha Murti, and Rajendra Chola sitting at his feet. So you see the image of that royal idiom being very clearly constructed here. Because not only is Rajendra Chola placed in the whole scenario here, but you can see that Lord Shiv is actually blessing his head. So now this kind of an image construction shows the people that the Chol kings were rightly ordained by their gods to rule. So they're carrying a particular sense of not just a royal diktat, but also infusing a religious idea with a royal idea. Now, till here, it makes sense that you can ascribe a sense of royalty or like a royal association to a temple and call that because of this image, this is a Chol temple. But here is where the problem deepens with more and more revisionist idea, with more and more scholarship that is very particularly studying the sculptures and just the temples that are there. You see that there are very little inscriptional evidence which directly relate to a Chola patronage beyond these three major temples that are there. Before Rajaraja's consecration, we only have one instance, that is from Parantaka I's Tondai Mana temple. Apart from that, there are no particular inscriptions that say with absolute certainty that this temple is ascribed to this dynasty. Moreover, Gangaikonda Cholapuram and Rajarajeshwara temples are wholly unique and singular in scale. And that then refutes the particular point initially where Geeta Vasudevan and Parantis said that the Rajarajeshwara temple was to serve as a model for further subsequent temples. It isn't a model because we know for a fact that the Rajarajeshwara temple is completely unique in itself. And even beyond that, if we argue that there is a royal idiom that is created with the image of Rajendra Chola here and Chandeshanugraha Murthy, beyond that, we have absolutely no clue if there was any particular royal image that was created that used to highlight that, okay, that this is the seal of the Chol, that this is the dynastic emblem, which if we come across on any inscription or on any temple architecture, we can associate with the Chol. That is also nowhere to be found. And interestingly, it is not with the kings, but rather with the queens that we actually have more instances of direct royal patronage. So you have this MB and Mahadevi phase that came up. She directly provides inscriptional evidence that she consecrated and patronized temples like the Agasteshwara temple, Tiruaraneri Alvar temple. I apologize if I am mispronouncing a particular name. But essentially, the point is that even at the Nallur Kandaswamy temple, she herself donated large amounts of jewelry and several bronze sculptures. Now, that's a completely different argument that with Sembian Mahadevi phase, there was a cultural desiccation. Not only did she transform the stone materials that were used, but there was also a little bit of stiffness that emerged in the images that were there. They weren't necessarily very fluid as they were before.
Shankarji?
Yes, sir.
I think you're approaching your conclusion now, right?
Yes, sir. This is the last slide.
Yeah.
So, but again, the point is that even with the Chola customs of granting gifts and publicizing grandiose works of art, these were precipitated by the Pallavas and the Pandyas that came before them. So if we today come to the point of understanding a dynastic label and associate the dynasty here, the reason I've picked up the Chidambaram temple especially is not for my sake of convenience that it is directly associated with the Chol king, but rather to portray that it is highly problematic if we simply take a dynastic labeling at face value. So this presentation at the end is not a primary source work. I mean, I envisioned this whole idea right during the pandemic lockdown, and all I had was working with the primary source documents that the scholars and researchers before me had come together. But it is about an introspective understanding that we need to rediscover, we need to revise the contextual realities of what temples really stood for. And we need to go beyond the very basic colonial ascriptions of just looking at a formal aspect. Now, this formalism also came from a European point of view, which is wholly dissimilar to how the Indian scenario is. So we need to shed away that new or post-colonial thought and then come to these contextual realities. This Chidambaram temple is just one. You have hundreds and hundreds of temples that are there. And there is an absolute possibility and certainty that once we start contextualizing their unique realities, we can do away with the Western hegemony of how the formalistic dynastic labeling has been introduced and bring about our own methodologies of how we can truly uniquely associate and understand the Hindu convention of temple architecture. Right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Shankarji. That was really wonderful, amazing to see a youngster like you to be so rigorous academically in studying and proposing alternative methodologies, alternative Hindu methodologies, so to say, to study temples. All the best for you, and you probably are going to be an inspiration for many youngsters.